what was the whole purpose of Jesus doing miracles? It's to show people what?
It's to show that he is not just like everybody else.
That's right. He transcends natural law.
Yeah.
Welcome back to the Authentic Christian Podcast. I'm Aaron. This is Scott. And like we mentioned in episode 1, we didn't lose Tucker. He took a step back from the podcast after season 3, so you're stuck with just Scott and I this season. But this is a part 2. Episode 1, we talked about basically the idea of, did Jesus really exist? Is he a real historical figure, or is he a myth? There's a lot of people who believe that Jesus was just a Jew who was killed by Rome for leading a revolt, right? That's what a lot of Jews believe. Then there are people who believe Jesus was a myth. And believe it or not, some of the world's most famous atheists and some very popular public figures today say this idea of, well, look, why don't I believe in Jesus? Because I'm not 10, right? There's no evidence for it. He was a myth. We talked a lot about the resources, in episode 1, the eyewitness accounts. We talked about how these eyewitness accounts are valuable, they're reliable. In court cases, they call personal witnesses, right? Criminal cases. Well, why? Because eyewitness accounts are reliable. And so we looked at biblical writers, and we looked at early non-inspired Christian writers, the early church fathers. And then for those who say, well, that's biased, we even looked at hostile witnesses. And those are really important, okay? And so we looked at a lot of those. And from the non-biblical witnesses who are hostile with the question of, did Jesus exist? We have evidence where they say Jesus was born to a poor virgin, or he said he was. His father was a carpenter. He worked miracles. He was known for wisdom and virtue. He claimed to be God. He was crucified by Pontius Pilate during the reign of Tiberius. Earthquakes and darkness accompanied his death, followed by reports that he rose from the dead, and he appeared to his disciples and showed them his wounds. They worshiped him as God, and it even caused disturbances among the Jews that led to such large persecution, and the Jews actually being kicked out by the Roman emperor. Hey, all the Jews have to leave Rome, right? And so this is actually what one writer said. He said this: Jesus was so well known within a century that word of him likely reached no less than 7 Roman emperors: Claudius, who evicted the Christians from Rome; Nero, who persecuted Christians; Vespasian; Titus. Those are the 2 guys who were in the tent when Josephus defected, okay? And Domitian, who also persecuted Christians, under whose patronage Josephus wrote, and Trajan, who replied to Pliny. We actually read about the Pliny and Trajan. Trajan was the Roman emperor, and Pliny was the one who wrote to him, who persecuted Christians. We looked at those in episode 1. So Jesus was so well known that he had interactions, or people knew of him, within all of those 7 Roman emperors, right? So did the idea that did Jesus really exist? I got a couple more quotes. This is from a guy named Bart Ehrman. Okay, he's a huge biblical skeptic about whether we can trust the text. Kyle Butt from Apologetics Press actually debated him on God's existence and suffering. He's really well known in the skeptical community, right? But even these are some quotes from him from his book, Did Jesus Exist? I actually have read that book. These are 3 quotes, okay? The first quote's when he's discussing what the scholarly consensus is about, did Jesus actually exist, a real person named Jesus, or is he a myth? This is what Bart Ehrman, who does not believe in the Bible, does not believe Jesus was the Son of God, thinks that was made up later. This is what he says. Despite the enormous range of opinion, there are several points on which virtually all scholars of antiquity agree. Not all Christian scholars. He says all scholars of antiquity agree. Jesus was a Jewish man known to be a preacher and teacher who was crucified, a Roman form of execution, in Jerusalem during the reign of Roman Emperor Tiberius, when Pontius Pilate was the governor of Judea. Okay? So he basically says all scholars of antiquity agree Jesus was a real person, and that all those facts about him are true, right? This is another quote. I'll let you read this one, Scott. It's 2 quotes, but this is a part where he's discussing how seriously people who believe that Jesus was a myth are actually taken, like in academic circles. So like if somebody like Bill Maher says, oh, look, this is ridiculous, Jesus didn't exist. If someone who claims to be a scholar believes and says Jesus never existed, this is what Bart Ehrman says, how seriously they're actually taken. Read those 2 bullets.
It is fair to say that mythicists as a group and as individuals are not taken seriously by the vast majority of scholars in the field of New Testament, early Christianity, ancient history, and theology. Another quote: the idea that Jesus did not exist is a modern notion. It has no ancient precedents. It was made up in the 18th century. One might as well call it a modern myth, the myth of the mythical Jesus.
So he basically says, if anyone makes the argument to you that Jesus didn't exist as a real person, then historians don't take him seriously.
Yeah.
I mean, that's really what he's saying. He's saying nobody before the 1800s even believed this. Literally, the idea that Jesus didn't exist and wasn't a real person historically was made up 200 years ago.
Yeah, there's nothing more verifiable.
Yeah. Okay. So I think we've sort of, I don't know, we're being a dead horse. We've established Jesus did live and die, just like the Bible says that he did. Now, the real problem for people, though, is not his life and his death. What is the biggest problem? What is the main issue most people have with the biblical story of Jesus?
The empty tomb and how to explain it.
Yeah, I'd say. You want to elaborate?
Yeah. Well, most people's issue with it is the resurrection, right? They hate the idea of miracles. We even had a president who stripped all the miracles out, right? I think that's the story. I don't know. Maybe it wasn't a president. I'm forgetting the story, so I won't go there.
Jefferson Bible or something like that?
Maybe something like
I
that.
don't know. I think that might be it, but anyway.
That's the idea. Most people don't like that. Most people haven't seen one before, so they just outright reject it. But it's a weird, rational disconnect.
Yeah, I think you're right. The main issue most people have is they don't have a problem with Jesus' life and death. A lot of people even say, well, I even like some of his teachings, be nice to people, turn the other cheek, well, as long as it applies to them. Mm-hmm. But when he said basically, hey, when people persecute you, you should rejoice, they don't like that part, right? But most people don't have an issue with Jesus' birth, death, but the problem they have is the empty tomb. And their rationale is this: well, I've never seen a miracle, therefore I don't really care how many people have seen it or claim to see it. Mm-hmm. I don't care how many other people wrote about it. Doesn't matter if there's 1,000 people, I don't believe them. And this is, I guess, a quote that I found from an actual person that sort of embodies that. And so this is a guy named Richard Carrier, and he wrote an article called Why I Don't Buy the Resurrection. All right. This is what he said. He said, no amount of argument can convince me to trust a 2,000-year-old secondhand report over what I see myself directly here and now with my own eyes. If I observe facts which entail that I will cease to exist when I die, then the Jesus story can never override that observation, being infinitely weaker as a proof. And yet all the evidence before my senses confirms my mortality. So he's basically saying, I don't care how many other people write about it, how much evidence there is. I don't care if there's 10,000 writers that say they saw something that broke natural law. If I see that that everybody else around me dies, then I'm never going to believe it. And he says this at the end of that quote: a 2,000-year-old secondhand tale from the backwaters of an illiterate, it's funny, I misread that word. A 2,000-year-old secondhand tale from the backwaters of an illiterate and ignorant land can never overpower these facts. I don't know. I think it's, first of all, I mean, you see what he's saying. Basically, if I haven't seen it, I don't believe it. I wouldn't agree that the people that wrote are ignorant and illiterate. I mean, would you say the Bible writers are ignorant and illiterate?
No, and it's just silly. Like, I thought about this before one time. We were talking about this. I don't understand how somebody can make a statement such as that the only thing they can believe are the things they see with their own eyes and ears, yet they somehow believe that these men who they believe doesn't even exist are both illiterate and ignorant?
Yeah, I mean
it's just you give yourself away in your own statement immediately.
Well, I'll tell you what I think. I think statements like this, here's what I think: they're a product of an evolutionary mindset. Here's why. The evolutionary mindset says that the people today are the what? Smartest that have ever existed.
Yeah.
They say that mankind is evolving.
We're the epitome.
We're the smartest that there. Now, let me tell you, whether evolutionists or not, if you want to be humbled in how much you don't know, go read a founding fathers document. Just go read it. Like, go listen to a speech they made.
Go
right?
see if you can understand. I guess you can.
Go
half
read
of
it.
what they said.
See if you can read and understand. I'm telling you, get your thesaurus and your dictionary right next to you, because you read some of these guys from 200 years ago. You're reading them and you're like, what does that word mean? You look it up. You're like, it's a 10-cent word or whatever. That's a $10 word.
Yeah, that's one of them.
They're all over the place.
Ones.
They're extremely intelligent, but the evolutionary mindset wants you to think, people 2,000 years ago were illiterate. Almost all the Bible writers spoke multiple languages. Jesus, he was illiterate. I mean, he obviously quotes from the Septuagint, which is the Greek translation of the Hebrew Old Testament. So he knows Greek. He knows Hebrew. Some of these guys know multiple languages. I know one language. I know like pollo. That's Spanish for chicken. That's all. Bebe means drink. That's all. I only know a couple words. You could call me ignorant if you want, because I know one language. But when I've gone in the past to do mission work in Africa, there's guys that live in mud huts and know 3 languages. 3 languages. And to say biblical writers are ignorant and illiterate, you know why he thinks they're ignorant and illiterate? Because they don't agree with him. And that's sort of the height of ignorance, or the height of arrogance, to think.
Because they don't speak the same thing and write the same thing as him.
You think like the pyramids, and you got all these conspiracy theories. The pyramids were not built by aliens. Hate to break it to you. You look at the Roman aqueducts that exist for 2,000 years. Some of them are like still intact. They have Roman bridges built with wood and stone that still exist. Roman walls in some cities over there that still are like intact 2,000 years later. And like in America, it's like we built a road and like 10 years later, you got to rebuild it. These people were extremely intelligent. And the reason is because evolution's false. We are not the height of evolution. The biblical mindset, which fits way better with population genetics, so many different sciences, is that Adam and Eve, and I believe that was the pinnacle of humanity. And people's genes and stuff have been degrading ever since then, right?
Yeah.
But just go read someone from 200 years ago. Just pull up like Founding Fathers document, Bill of Rights, whatever you want.
How about this?
Thanksgiving Day address. Just go read it.
We all tend to think the only people who can even speak to us on those documents from 200 years ago are people who have college degrees.
Yeah.
How about that? How about even on these things? Why do we sit around and pretend that you can't even be an authority on these matters unless you go to college, yet you turn around and then accuse the people who you went to college to study of being ignorant and illiterate?
Yeah, good point.
What? You know what I'm saying?
It's a good point.
It just doesn't make sense.
No, you're right. But basically, just go read some early documents and tell me whether you think these people are ignorant and illiterate, right? This is the second part of his quote. He said this. This is his quote. He says, I see no one returning to life after their brain has completely died from a lack of oxygen. I have had no conversations with spirits of the dead. What I see is quite the opposite of everything this tall tale claims. How can it command more respect than my own two eyes? It cannot. So basically, he says, I've never seen it before. I've never seen something like this happen. Therefore, it can't be true. I have to personally see it myself to believe it. I think it's funny because basically what he's saying is, I know what natural law is. Dead people stay dead. Therefore, I don't believe it. And my thing is like, do you think the people in the first century didn't know what natural law was?
He said, all I've got to do is see it and hear it once, and I've got it figured out, buddy. Nah, I hear you.
Yeah, I mean,
absolutely.
in the Bible.
They knew what it was. He's not the first person to have ever seen this.
Yeah, what are some examples you can think of what was the whole purpose of Jesus doing miracles? It's to show people what?
It's to show that he is not just like everybody else.
That's right. He transcends natural law, which means John 3, Nicodemus, he said, teacher, Rabbi, we know you're a teacher come from God because no one can do the things that you do unless God is with them.
Yes.
And he's talking about miracle signs and wonders.
Absolutely.
So the idea is, and Jesus talks about this in John 5, maybe we're talking about the different people that testify to him. These the works that I do. He says, hey, why should you believe I'm from God? Because I'm different. Because I'm doing miracles.
Because the works that I do testify of me.
That's right. In the first century, did Joseph know natural law when Mary turned up pregnant? What did Joseph say?
He knew what it was. He was decided to put her away privily because he was an honorable man. Why would he put her away?
Because he knows that for someone to get pregnant, a man and a woman have to come together and do the deed.
And what's the thing that lets you put someone away?
That's right.
So yeah, he put two and two together.
So he did. And he knows when Mary turns up pregnant, this is not natural. And then he finds out, oh, wait, this is supernatural. Mm-hmm. God did something special. They knew what natural law was. When Jesus turned water to wine in John 2, were the people like, yeah, no, but people do that all the time. No, it says his disciples believed in him. Why? Because they said, this guy's different. When Jesus walked on water, were they just like, hey, what's up, Jesus? Yeah, it happens all the time. No. When Jesus calmed a storm, they're like, who is this man that the winds and the waves obey him?
When he restored Lazarus's rotten, stinky flesh.
Yes.
And made him walk out as if he had never been all rotten and stinky and bloated.
Go there. Go to John 11. Because guess what? It wasn't just his disciples that recognized the miracles. Even their enemies did.
It made them mad.
Angry. Let's read it. Go to John 11, 38.
Yeah, you want 38? I'll start in there.
Start John 11, 38. And I want you to read like all the way through 53. I might interrupt.
All right. No, that's fine. Then Jesus, again groaning in himself, came to the tomb. It was a cave, and a stone lay against it. Jesus said, take away the stone. Martha, the sister of him who was dead, said to him, Lord, by this time there's a stench, for he has been dead 4 days. Jesus said to her, did I not say to you that if you would believe, you would see the glory of God? Then they took away the stone from the place where the dead man was lying, and Jesus lifted up his eyes and said, Father, I thank you that you have heard me, and I know that you always hear me. But because of the people who are standing by, I said this, that they may believe that you sent me. Now when he heard these things, he cried with a loud voice, Lazarus, come forth. And he who had died came out, bound hand and foot with grave clothes, and his face wrapped with a cloth. And Jesus said to them, loose him and let him go.
Okay, so he resurrects Lazarus. Now look who believes it's not just his believers, or his followers. Look at verse, keep going, 45.
Then many of the Jews who had come to Mary and had seen the things Jesus did believed in him. Why would the Jews have come? They're there to mourn, things of that nature, right? Okay. But some of them went away to the Pharisees and told the things Jesus did. Then the chief priests and the Pharisees gathered a council and said, what shall we do? For this man works many signs.
Enemies, they recognize he's working real miracles.
They recognized it.
And they recognize, too, something's different. They know people don't work miracles all the time. All right, verse 48, keep going.
If we let him alone like this, everyone will believe in him, and the Romans will come and take away both our place and our nation.
So they see him work miracles, and what's their concern? Hey,
the Romans are going to take our place and nation because the
if
Romans are going to see it, and they're going to be concerned.
And I think it's the pocketbook. You want to upset somebody, start messing with their money.
Yep.
And so the Jews say, hey, if we leave him alone, he's doing these miracles, people are going to believe in him and leave us. And the Romans are going to take away our place in our nation. We're going to lose our privileged position.
He's going to become the leader now.
That's right.
Take them out.
That's right.
Usurp their authority.
Right. So read 49 through 53 now.
All right. And one of them, Caiaphas, being high priest that year, said to them, you know nothing at all, nor do you consider that it is expedient for us that one man should die for the people, and not that the whole nation should perish. Now this he did not say on his own authority, but being high priest that year, he prophesied that Jesus would die for the nation, and not for that nation only, but also that he would gather together in one the children of God who were scattered abroad. Then from that day on, they plotted to put him to death.
Okay. So they see Jesus work miracles, and they're concerned about people leaving them to follow Jesus, and Rome taking away their position, their power, probably their money. So they say we should kill him.
Yeah. Another place they say, they don't deny it, but they say the source of it is the devil.
That's right. That's right.
No one denies what he did.
Yes. So even the enemies recognized what Jesus was doing defied natural law. And so when this guy says, I can't believe it unless I see it with my own two eyes, not even if there are dozens of witnesses who write about it.
Even if you see it with your own two eyes, if you're really like that, you're still not going to believe it just like they did.
Yeah. And you know what I want to ask him? Because I'm assuming this guy's an atheist. What I would like to ask him is, okay, so you don't believe anything that you haven't seen with your two eyes. How do you believe the universe started?
Oh, yeah. Good point there. How do you believe that started? You didn't see it?
Yeah. I mean, I would assume his response would be, well, the Big Bang Theory. Yeah. And I would say, well, I mean, that's something modern science has been trying to recreate, and they can't recreate it in the slightest. And with that one, I guarantee you he believes it. He has no eyewitnesses. He has no people who are first or secondhand or third hand. He has no witnesses at all. Because according to his model of how the universe came into existence, the earth exploded into existence. The universe exploded into existence from nothing 14 billion years ago. The earth came into existence, 4 billion years ago? And humans didn't even start to evolve for 200 million years.
Yeah, they've changed the numbers many times.
And they will probably by the time we finish this episode. But the idea is he believes in something he has no evidence for. No evidence nor eyewitnesses.
Yeah, does he believe in Antarctica or the Arctic Circle? Has he been to China before? If not, does he believe in it? Yes. Or does he take the eyewitness testimony of the Chinese people when they come? Or does he reject it because he hasn't seen it with his own eyes? Or is their word not good enough? What about all the writings and pictures of there? They can be faked, right? So we got to reject that.
Yep.
It's just silly.
I agree with you. I had a friend that I went to church camp with, Josh Ball, who went and taught English in China.
Yeah.
I've never been there.
Well, why wouldn't apply that logic in modern times, of course. Well, why not? Where's your line of demarcation then? Why do you not do it now?
Yeah. I mean,
but you do it for that.
Why would I believe Josh when he tells me about the university he taught English? Why would I believe him? Because he's trustworthy. Because everything about him, his life, the way he lives, the things I've known him for years, everything is trustworthy. That's why I believe him. So I believe in things I haven't seen with my own two eyes when they come from trustworthy sources.
Yeah, and not only that, you want to go back for a second. If you ask Josh, where did he go? He might tell you where it is, what it was called, and who went there with him, etc. He'd give you details that
I could check if I really wanted to.
It would be a believable story.
It would, yeah. I mean, I remember I talked to a guy once about Noah's Ark, and he was, he wasn't a Christian. He was like, "You really think all that Noah's Ark stuff is real?" And I was like, "Well, yeah." He's like, "That's ridiculous." I said, "Can I give you a better argument?" He was like, "What?" I said, "Why are you arguing about Noah's Ark? You should argue about Genesis 1.
Absolutely.
Like I said, I'm trying to help you out. Like I'm trying to make a better argument for you. Like if you believe there's a God that can speak a universe into existence, you shouldn't have a hard time thinking he can build a boat or he can have someone else build a boat and he can just send some water. If you really want to get down to the crux of it, you need to go to how the universe originated. And so for this guy, he says, well, if I haven't seen it in my own two eyes, I don't believe it. But I guarantee you he believes that the universe, nothing explodes. Oh, it's antimatter or dark, whatever.
He believed these men were ignorant and illiterate. How did he
That's
believe
right.
that?
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I agree. I'm sorry I cut you off. I wasn't trying
You're
to be
allowed
rude,
to.
but
You're allowed to. No, but I agree with you. It's so illogical. And so here's what I think. I think that people don't want to believe in a resurrection because, as you said earlier, it requires a belief in miracles. And if it requires the belief in the supernatural or miracles, then that requires a higher power who can operate miraculously.
Yeah, what it means is if you believe in miracles, everything you currently believed or did believe about this world, this life, how you should do, should be falling away, and you should be looking at what now the text tells you.
Absolutely.
And that's the problem, right? That's the problem, because that's big change for most people.
Go to Romans 1. You're spot on. So people want to believe in a natural explanation for the empty tomb. Because if they can believe, well, it wasn't a miracle.
You said what? You want to go where?
Romans 1:20.
Okay.
So people today, they do not want to believe in the miraculous at any time in history. They want to believe, well, there's a natural explanation for the empty tomb. Well, why? Because it gives them the ability, as you said multiple times, and I said earlier, to live their life however they want to.
Yeah,
They want no moral accountability to a higher power, because they think, well, if we're evolved, and I think this is really why evolution is so popular, because if we're evolved monkeys and we're at the top of the chain, we can do whatever we want. I can live however I want. And I'm a firm believer that sexual freedom is the number one reason. I don't really think people care about many other things than that. They don't want to believe in a God because they want to be able to sleep with whoever they want, do whatever they want, divorce whenever they want. I mean, it's all about them and what pleases them. It's this hedonism, right? And so they think if I'm an evolved monkey, I'm the highest life form, there's no God, I can live however I want to live.
Yep.
Look at Romans 1:20. Paul writes about this. I need to get there to him in Romans 11.
I want to say something too.
Yeah, go
after
ahead.
you get to it. I was just going to say, look, it's also true. I'll put it like this. You say it's this evolutionary mindset. And that's true. I think deeper than that, it just boils down to these people and I say these, I was this way for a time.
Sure.
Look,
sure.
I'm not,
all of us.
I'm talking very strongly.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to be, let me just borrow a colloquial term.
Okay.
It has a religious significance, but I'll explain what I mean. I'm not trying to be judgy here in the sense of, I think that I'm inherently more valuable than you and I'm better than you. And that's why I've succeeded in overcoming these struggles and you haven't. That's not at all what I'm saying.
Sure.
I still struggle with a lot of things. Mm-hmm. What I'm saying is that at some point you need to, when you acknowledge what a miracle is, you're forced to deal with the reality that this life is not everything that there is.
That's right.
And that means you have to start thinking about something besides what you're going to eat tomorrow, where you want to vacation, who you want to marry, how you want to raise your kid. You got to start thinking about it in the perspective of, okay, there's a something, a someone, a standard out here I should probably be caring about, because when this life's over, there's going to be something for me to answer for, or something to think about, or something to do. Mm-hmm. And when you're at that point, that's when you need to dive into the text. Anyway, sorry. I go off in tangents. Go ahead.
You're allowed to go on tangents.
Romans 1:20. You wanted me to read, right?
Yeah, start reading verse 20.
Right. For since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes are clearly seen.
I like it when you talk a lot, by the way. I do.
Yeah, I'm just trying to be pertinent to the actual discussion.
You did. I think it was good. All right.
Being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse, because although they knew God, they did not glorify him as God, nor were they thankful, but became futile in their thoughts, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Professing to be wise, they became fools, and changed the glory of the incorruptible God into an image made like corruptible man, and birds, and four-footed animals, and creeping things. We reduce God to something we can see.
That's right. Okay, now summarize. Verse 20. God's invisible attributes are clearly seen when you look at the things that are made. Mm-hmm. When you look at creation, when you go look at a tree, look at your hand. I mean, come on. People talk about, AI is amazing with like computer technology, but I've seen people, and it's sort of been laughable for years, trying to make a robot that can duplicate what humans can do. Just look at your hand, right? Like, think of all the muscles and tendons. If you've ever cut your hand
and we've made great advances, but it's still not quite there.
Nowhere close, right? And so you look at the creation and you look at your own body, and you should say, wow, like I am fearfully and wonderfully made, like the Bible says.
That's what that's talking about, man.
Yes. And so what Paul is saying is when you think about those things, you can't see God, but you know that he's powerful. There is a God and his invisible attributes are seen. So you have no excuse.
Amen.
When you look at creation, you should say, God tells you there is no excuse to not know there's a God. And then look at but verse 21, they knew God. There's proof for him. There's always proof for him, but they didn't glorify him and they weren't thankful and they became futile. Their hearts were darkened, right? They weren't born darkened as totally depravity teaches. Their foolish hearts were darkened. They thought they were wise. This guy that wrote this, I would never believe some illiterate tale in a 2,000-year-old backwater town. He sounds wise, right?
Yeah.
He became a fool and he changed the glory of God into something like you said he can see. And look at verse 24. As we read through, look at verse 24. Read 24 and 25 first.
Okay. Therefore, God also gave them up to uncleanness in the lust of their hearts to dishonor their bodies among themselves, who exchanged the truth of God for a lie and worshipped and served the creature rather than the Creator, who is blessed forever. Amen.
So he says, basically, they had reason to believe in God. There's evidence.
Right.
They weren't thankful. They didn't want to see it.
Nope.
And so what did they do? God gave them up. He let them go. God won't force you.
He's not going to get on his hands and knees and beg you.
That's right.
Again.
No, that's right.
Because he practically did that before in a sense. He did not put himself like a dog. He had dignity.
He went through worse.
He went through so much for us.
He did. Way, way worse than any animal goes through.
So much.
So God gave them up to their uncleanness. I'm telling you, man, I think it's all sexual freedom. Listen to this. The lust of their hearts to dishonor their bodies among themselves, right? And they exchanged the truth of God for a lie. And they worshiped and served not God, but who? The creature, themselves. Yeah. That's what sexual freedom is. I know God made me this way. I want to do what I want to do. I want to worship and serve the creature. I want to worship and serve this woman's body because, it's so beautiful. Who made it?
Yeah.
The God that spoke a universe in existence.
Yeah, I think a lot of people think about this. They serve the creature rather than themselves. They think of some animal idol made out of gold, like the golden calf or whatever.
Which could be true, but...
Could be, but no, really.
I think that's what
they're serving the creature rather than the creator. I think that,
themselves,
I think
they're focusing on the things that were made by God. However, it's all this. It's all true, right?
At the end of the day, yeah.
Okay, and look at verse 26. For this reason, God did what? He gave them up. He gave them up again. Verse 24, he gave them up. Verse 25, they sin, he lets you go. You sin, he lets you go further. To vile passions, for even their women exchange the natural use for what is against nature. Likewise, the men, leaving the natural use of the woman. Hey, man and woman, that's what God made it. Genesis 2:24, right?
Yeah, the natural use. How can you be more plain than that without being graphic?
That's right. It's talking about sex, right?
Yes.
Within a marriage. The natural is they burned in their lust for one another, men with men, committing what is shameful, and receiving in themselves the penalty of the error which was due, right? It's talking about homosexuality, lesbianism. It's clear as day, right? Verse 28, even as they did not like to retain God in their knowledge, God gave them up, what? Over. He gives you up, he gives you up, he gives you over, right?
Yeah,
and you can read the rest of that where it's just all these sins. And it all starts with not recognizing God's authority and thinking that somehow you can get away with it. You can just, Galatians says you're going to reap what you sow, right?
Yeah.
So ultimately, everybody has evidence, but people didn't want to see it. And so that is all why people don't want to believe in miracles. They don't want to believe in a God that they're accountable to. They don't want moral repercussions for the way, and I'm saying I'm with you, man. I'm glad you clarified that. There's a period in my life when I was unfaithful and lived for, guess what? For me. It was hedonism. What makes Aaron feel good? What do I want to do? I didn't, God, whatever, right?
Well, you're going to be a servant to someone.
That's right.
Who are you going to put there? If it's not God, it's going to be you or your boss or your wife or whoever you idolize or whoever it is.
Yeah.
You're going to have a master.
Yeah. And I think because they don't want more repercussions, I really don't think that, I remember one atheist, I forget his name, but he said, they asked him what intellectual argument led him to atheism. And he said, it wasn't an intellectual argument. He said he had parents who claimed to be Christians and it didn't make whatever effect in their lives at all. He saw lukewarm Christians as his parents and said, well, if that's the way they live, there must not be a God. I think in the same way, there's a lot of people who are not really convinced by the argument, but they want to live however they want to live. And it's convenient. So then they go looking for something to support that. And they find these arguments to explain the origin of the universe. Oh, the Big Bang. Oh, all right. Well, a lot of people believe that, so I'll believe that. Or the origin of mankind. And I heard someone say earlier, earlier, I was thinking of this quote, but man would rather say that he's related to a monkey than to be held accountable to God. So man would rather say that he is an evolved monkey, which makes me the top of the chain.
Can I rephrase it?
Sure.
I like that.
Go ahead.
Man would rather say that he's a monkey than to say that he is
accountable to God. However you want to reword
created
it.
in the image of God and accountable to.
There you go.
that standard that he gave.
Yeah.
I don't know, because it's so much more special. What we
Mhm.
really are,
Mm-hmm.
so much more.
Yeah.
And we would rather be a dumb animal
Yep.
that has just a short time here and they're gone,
Mm-hmm.
like the trees or anything else.
Yep.
Then we would be made in the image of God. Have
Yeah.
that to be given
Yep.
an attribute similar to him, because he loves us and wants us to have fellowship with him and to live forever in eternity.
Yeah.
And then to just say, oh, well, that means I got to do what you say, though.
Yeah. Exactly.
Are you kidding?
I
mean,
people want to do what they want to do, and
yeah.
evolution started in Darwin was 1800s, 1700s, whatever.
Yeah.
And before that, people had the same thing. They just didn't call it evolution. They had different reasons, right? But ultimately, they just don't want to be accountable. They want to be able to live however they want to live. And unfortunately, there's Christians that sort of have the same attitude. They say they believe in God.
I want to go live with my father.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly, in heaven. So, okay, getting back to the resurrection. So a lot of time you say, how do people respond if you talk about the resurrection? Some people say, well, he didn't exist. Well, here's evidence that he did. Well, okay, but he didn't resurrect. Well, the question is, well, where's the body? Now, somebody will say, well, maybe Jesus didn't die. And this is actual theory. Maybe Jesus didn't die, but like he just passed out. He woke up later when they laid him on the cold stone.
The old swoon theory.
Yeah. They laid him on a cold stone slab and he just like a cold shower in the morning. Like if you're taking a shower and someone sneaks in and turns
He
it to
wasn't
cold.
really dead. He was on the brink of death. And
And I mean, legitimately, with the tomb being empty, and you say, well, I wasn't there. Well, look at all the writers. I mean, these guys were all arguing about it 2,000 years ago. I mean, I don't know if I have it in my notes or not, but I mean, this is something, well, I know I have part of it, Matthew. Okay, we'll get there. I think I do have something on it. But, you said the swoon theory, which initially I read a guy named Hugh Schoenfeld wrote a book in the 70s about it. But from what I've seen, it originated like in the late 1700s. You want to explain what it is? Basically, what's the theory? We kind of touched on it, but go ahead, explain.
The theory is that somehow or another, despite all of the physical abuse and loss of blood and being stabbed and everything, he just got real weak and passed out. And when he touched that cold stone, it's kind of like
he didn't die on the
cold
cross.
bucket of water, and he was like, "Oh wow, that was rough," and he was woke up.
Yeah,
What?
As if they basically say Jesus didn't die on the cross.
Yeah,
but he fainted or swooned.
Yeah,
right. And so then, later they take him into this tomb and they lay him on the cold stone slab, and he just like revived.
Yeah, he made it through all that torturous agony, being taken down, prepared for the funeral, wrapped up, all of it, carried out through the funeral arrangements.
Yeah.
And then he woke up a few days later because he got a little cold.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny to me that he didn't wake up till 3 days later, not when they laid him in the tomb.
I know.
On the cold stone slab when he's wrapped in linens. I mean, he's wrapped in cloths, right?
Yeah.
Well, okay, what are some major problems that you would say to this theory?
Well, I've already alluded to a lot of them, but the major one is that, the first thing that comes to my mind is he got stabbed in the side.
Yeah, that's
a big one.
Yeah.
You don't really wake up from that when you get pierced in the heart or something else, or you get stabbed that hard through the ribs.
Yeah.
That's a big problem. Well, let me think. There's more. Ignores his what happened before he got there, the scourging and everything of that nature. It ignores all of the dehydration and blood loss. It just so many different things.
Well, I think of all those things, like you can put all those together, and basically it is ignoring the major fact that Jesus had been scourged, which they called the little death because some people died from it. He'd been crucified by Romans, who were just figuring this crucifixion thing out.
That's it. That's the part I forgot. Absolutely, man. Yeah, you go ahead.
If Jesus is crucified in 33 AD, right? It's not like the Romans it's not like, hey, you know what? This guy Jesus, let's try something new on him, crucifixion, right?
Yeah.
They've been doing this
new thing.
They've been doing this for at least 100 years. If you go look up in Roman history, there was a guy named Spartacus, and it was like, I think 70 years before Christ. So 70 BC, which add the 30, it's 100 years before Jesus' crucifixion, right? Spartacus was a slave who led a revolt in Rome. And there was a rich senator named Crassus who Forbes talked about him. Forbes did a list of like the top 10 richest people, I think, in history. And he was in their top 10. And they actually estimated his wealth, I think, at like $170 billion, right? So he's a rich Roman, okay? Yeah. And a lot of that money came on the back of slave trade, I think, which is probably why he wanted to put down the slave revolt, right? So Crassus basically puts this army together. He paid for it himself. and he crushed Spartacus' rebellion in like 2 years after the rebellion, right? And so what he did at his own expense, he crucified 6,000 Roman soldiers along a famous road called the Appian Way.
Yep.
Okay. So I don't know, I forget how often it was, but he took 6,000 slaves who were in the revolt of Spartacus and crucified them along this road. 6,000 people, 100 years before Jesus. They weren't just figuring out crucifixion at the time of Christ, which means they were experts at it. In fact,
yeah, you'd have to suppose that they were amateurs.
yeah. I mean, and in fact, there's something that I read about, I've got it, the tabula, Tabula, Putiolana, right? Now, and this is going to give you information. There's not a whole lot of information of how actual crucifixions historically were carried out. You've got the biblical texts that talk about some of the things they would do, right? But in 1966, this was published, and it was discovered in Pozzuoli, right? Excavations there, and it's in the National Museum of Naples. But basically, it's 3 marble fragments with a Latin inscription, and it says, concerning the public funeral service. And basically, what the article that I read about it, it was an archaeological thing. This is what they said. Based on the style of the script that it was written in and the language, historians say this could be from the middle of the 1st century AD or the time shortly after, right? So middle of the 1st century AD is like 50 AD, so right after Jesus, right? It contains the regulations dictated by municipal authorities concerning how crucifixion was to be carried out, okay? So it's basically 3 clay, let me see, to say clay tablet, 3 marble fragments that it's almost like a bulletin. I think it was like the letters were 6 centimeters high, right? And I'm assuming they put it in the middle of town. And basically what it was is it was information on how to crucify, and it was like contractors. So they'd hire contractors. Okay, this is what it said. It said inscription. The inscription describes it was usually a punishment meant for criminals and slaves. And this is what the regulations in the inscription were. The contractors to carry out crucifixion had to have a crew of healthy 20 to 50-year-old slaves. They all had to wear colored hats if they go into the city. I'm assuming this is so people know, hey, this is the crucifixion team. The crew was given the task of digging the holes for the crosses, raising the victims, affixing the victim to the stipes, and once the victim was dead, to remove the nails and take the body away. So I'm saying all that to say this. The Romans have been crucifying people for 100 years. I mean, obviously longer than that. The fact that he crucified 6,000 slaves, and he basically was setting up, hey, this is how Rome deals with rebellions. We will crucify you. And he did to 6,000 people. 100 years later, they're experts at it. They have people by the 1st century who are like contractors. Like when you go have a house built.
If you go on Fiverr right now and you read the descriptions, people looking
What's
to
Fiverr?
hire. It's a website that you can go to and you can hire people to do different things.
Okay.
It'll be set up similarly. There'll be an ad, somebody's offering services, or maybe you're wanting services, and it'll be laid out a description like this. The job is this. It'll take this amount of people or this amount of time. We want this thing. We want that. And this is how much we pay. If you go and you're looking at being a contractor or something, this is kind of like that. They're subcontracting out the work. And here's the standard contract and agreement. You need to meet these qualifications to take a bid on this job.
Yeah, exactly.
That's what they're doing.
When you build a house, who do you get?
You get a general contractor or something.
Who does
like
what?
That, right?
Who does this for a living?
Yes.
You hire.
Who does this for a living?
Yeah. So when you hire somebody to build your house, you hire somebody who is an expert at it, who does it for a living. Even if they're not the best in the world, they're good at what they do.
Yeah, you're getting to the point I'm trying to make. Absolutely.
Yes.
There's an industry of people who do this for a living. How do you get an industry of tradesmen whose trade is crucifixion?
Yeah.
While you're an amateur?
Yeah. So when you put all those things together, you have the idea that, well, maybe they just didn't kill Jesus. Maybe they just, Jesus just swooned. Or some people even say, maybe Luke gave him medicine and he just passed out. Do you not think that these people who are experts at killing people, they've been doing it for over 100 years, do you think you're just going to pull a quick one over on them? No, that's why it says whenever they want to kill you, they break your legs.
Yeah, and it even said he refused the vinegar, which was mixed with myrrh, right?
Yeah, that's right.
He didn't want any.
Yeah, so he refused. They basically go to Jesus and they say he's dead already, so they don't break his legs to hasten or speed up his asphyxiation, right? So he can't breathe. So they say, okay, well, he's already dead. So they don't break his legs. They pierce his side with a spear, right? Now, let's just say, hypothetically, none of that exists. Let's say these guys are amateurs, which they're not. I don't even know why I'm entertaining this idea. But let's say they pull a quick one on these contractors for crucifixion, and they lay him in a tomb, and 3 days later, he resurrects, he gets to the disciples, he pounds on the door, they open the door. What do they see? They see a Jesus who's what?
Yep.
Bloodied, half dead, covered in cuts head to toe. His back's ripped open. I mean, first of all, the gospel accounts would then be liars.
Yeah, I know.
They would be liars who tell you, love your enemies, do good to those who spitefully use you, treat others as you want to be treated, do unto others as you would have them do unto you, Matthew 7:12. Love your neighbor as yourself. But hey, let's tell lies for the rest of our life.
Yeah, the foundation of why we say all this, let's just lie about that. Then say all the things that made him be killed or treated this way so that we can be treated that way too. And Jesus, the Jesus who didn't resurrect, shows up at your door. You don't go to your death preaching, he resurrected from the dead.
No. You see him and you're like, okay, you look horrible. You look awful.
Yeah.
I mean, on the road to Emmaus, the Bible writers say that they didn't recognize Jesus. Well, if he's got blood all over him and he's got holes in his wrists and his back is covered, I mean, if he's like this bloody mess, you're going to know who he is. Hey, you look like Jesus, but you look like you're torn to bits, right? But that's not what happened. When you look at the biblical account, there's something that turned these traitors, they betrayed Jesus, turns them from traitors into martyrs, right? I couldn't think of two words with the same letter. But it turns them into these people who've abandoned him to people who are willing to die for him, right? And why? People want to believe these crazy theories because they don't want to look at this stuff. They don't want to think about the logical implications because maybe they'd say, hey, maybe that's real. And then it requires me to live differently.
Yeah, because if we're created by God for him to be in fellowship, to ultimately because he wants us to be with him in eternity, that means there are things about this life that matter beyond just what I'm going to wear.
That's right.
Or if everybody thinks I'm an okay guy.
If Jesus resurrected, miracles exist. If miracles exist, God is real. If God is real, Jesus was the Son of God. And if Jesus was the Son of God, the things he said are true, including that there's a judgment coming.
Yes.
And that requires you to live a different.
And that judgment is going to be by what?
John 12:48.
The words which.
These words which I've spoken are those that will judge on the last day.
Yeah. So it's kind of important to decide for yourself absolutely whether you actually do believe this or not. You really need to look into this and take it seriously.
So the swoon theory, mark it, throw it out.
Yep.
It would imply that Romans didn't know how to crucify people. These experts, contractors, it's like saying somebody that you hired to build your house, like didn't know how to build a house, right?
Yeah.
And you pull a fast one on him, and then he somehow tricks the disciple. I mean, come on. So it's
just not tenable.
Okay, let's look at another popular theory, right? And this one is what you might call the someone stole the body story, all right? So in about 165 AD, there's an early writer, not inspired, named Justin Martyr. And he wrote something called Dialogue with Trypho. And Trypho's a Jew. And at the beginning of chapter 108, I mean, you can find this stuff for free on the internet. Justin Martyr, Dialogue with Trypho, chapter 108. He's talking about what the Jewish community had been circulating about the empty tomb of Christ. So this is 130 years after it actually happened. The Jewish community was still circulating this idea. And this is what it says. He starts off by saying, you all know that Jesus said he would give you the sign. He's telling this Jewish Trypho, this Jewish guy. He says, Trypho, you know that Jesus said he'd give you all the sign of Jonah, which is the resurrection, 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the fish. The Son of Man will be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth. Mm-hmm. He was telling them about the resurrection. And he says, Trypho, you know that Jesus said, once I resurrect, you all better repent. Because he's basically saying they wanted to see a sign from Jesus. He said, I'm not going to give you a sign except the sign of Jonah. Just as Jonah was in the belly of the fish 3 days and 3 nights, so the Son of Man will be in the heart of the earth 3. He says, look, you want to see a miracle, I'm not going to give you one except the resurrection. And once the resurrection happens, you better believe and repent. And Justin Martyr says this to the Jews, yet you not only have not repented after you learned that he did rise from the dead, but as I said before, you have even sent chosen and ordained men throughout all the world to proclaim that a godless and lawless heresy sprung from Jesus, a Galilean deceiver, whom we crucified, but his disciples stole him by night from the tomb where he was laid when unfastened from the cross, and now deceive men by asserting he's risen from the dead and ascended to heaven. So he basically, Justin Martyr is telling Trypho, you guys knew Jesus said he's going to resurrect. And after he did, you know it. But for the last 130 years, what have y'all been doing? You've been spreading this rumor that the disciples stole the body by night. There's even another writing in the 6th century. It's debated the date, but it's called the Toledoth Yeshu. It's a Jewish writing that circulated. And it says that Jesus was the illegitimate son of a soldier named Joseph, all right? Some of these references are even as early as 3rd century in this work. And they basically said they labeled Jesus as a disrespectful deceiver who led many away from the truth. And then it says this at the end of the writing, okay, about the discussion of his death. It says, a diligent search was made, and he, Jesus, was not found in the grave where he'd been buried. a gardener had taken him from the grave and had brought him into his garden and buried him in the sand over which the waters flowed into the garden. So you have Justin Martyr 130 years after. You have at least 500 years after this Toledot Yeshu writing. And basically this is the idea that the Jews had continued to perpetrate, which is that, well, Jesus died, but the disciples stole the body, right? There's actually a similar account. Guess where? In your
Bible.
Go to Matthew 28 and read 11 through 15.
Now, while they were going, behold, some of the guard came into the city and reported to the chief priest all the things that had happened. When they had assembled with the elders and consulted together, they gave a large sum of money to the soldiers, saying, "Tell them, his disciples came at night and stole him away while we slept. And if this comes to the governor's ears, we will appease him and make you secure." So they took the money and did as they were instructed. And this saying is commonly reported among the Jews until this day.
So whatever the writing of the Gospel of Matthew was, it lasted way past the writing. It lasted at least for a couple hundred years, where the Jews were basically saying, while the guards slept, the disciples stole the body, which I think is kind of ironic because, first of all, if they were asleep, then guess what? You wouldn't know who stole the body, right? And so this also shows you the fact that they couldn't find his what? They couldn't find the body. Yeah, if you want to crush Christianity, just find the body, right? And so there's so many problems with this theory. The other thing, why weren't they punished as others who slept on their watch? In Acts 12, 6 through 19, there were some soldiers who slept on their watch, and they were investigated and I believe put to death. And so the other thing happens
that's typical.
Yeah, let's in Acts 16, the jailer loses his prisoners, and he's about to kill himself because he thinks what? He's about to be put to death.
Yeah, it's a typical thing.
That's right. So what if they did steal the body? Let's just entertain this idea, right? If the disciples stole the body, what would their post-theft conduct look like? Would they preach about the resurrection to the point of physical persecution,
And
right?
death, yeah.
No, I mean,
They wouldn't want to do that if they had stolen the body.
If there was something today in our world that I knew was a lie and there was no upside to it, I would not make money. I wouldn't be fame. I would literally be persecuted and beat for a lie. What psycho would think that's a good idea to promote?
Yeah, if I was gonna steal the body and somehow I was just this bitter revolutionary or something, I wouldn't go around preaching it. I'd whisper rumors or something. I would
and let's
make it vague and a little hard to disprove or this or that. And
well, let's say it was one person. Let's say you have one guy who's off his rocker. No. Guess what happened? It was at least 11 or 12 different guys.
Yes.
That did it to the death.
Absolutely.
I mean, and even the Bible writers, even guys that weren't outside the apostles, I don't have it in my notes, but I'm pretty sure Luke died a martyr. I'm pretty sure that the other Bible writers, not the apostles, they died as martyrs. I mean,
all of them would have to be willing to do it.
Exactly.
And it wasn't limited to just the ones that we read about as the apostles. There are many other disciples who stayed faithful to the Lord after he resurrected, and they continued to help, right?
Mm-hmm.
We didn't start the church on the day of Pentecost with just 12 members before they got done preaching.
Mm-hmm.
There were other members who had followed along all this time. There are other people still talking. And have we even begun to talk yet? I don't know if we talked about it or mentioned it at all. The people that, when he resurrected.
Oh, the witnesses?
Yeah.
Oh, no, we haven't.
We need to skip. I don't want to get ahead.
No, you mean Matthew 27?
I know we talked about it before. Yeah. Resurrected.
No, I think I think we have. Well, we'll go.
I don't think we mentioned that.
I don't think we did. Look at that. So Matthew 27, I believe it is. So I'm already in Matthew. Let me find it. Matthew 27, and it is verse 51 through 53. Do you have it? All right.
Maybe we meant this for another episode or something. I'm not wanting to ruin something for a different one, but
Let's talk about it.
I think that it matters.
No, I think it's good. Okay. So basically, the idea is that Jesus resurrected from the dead, right? But listen to what Matthew 27, 51 through 53. Matthew 27, 51. Then behold, the veil of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. This is after Jesus gave up his spirit and died on the cross. The earth quaked, the rocks were split. Okay, now verse 52 says, and the graves were opened, and many bodies of the saints who had fallen asleep were raised. Okay, so, but listen to what it says in verse 53. And coming out of the graves after his resurrection, they went into the holy city and appeared to many.
Actually, Jesus wasn't the only one resurrected.
No, and I did a short video on this sometime in the past. I'll put it on the podcast resource page. But basically, these verses say that not only did Jesus resurrect, but there were some other people who resurrected.
Yes.
What episode is that in? Because I remember having in my notes, I have early writers that talk about other people. It doesn't matter, whatever.
But the point is,
I bet we skipped it. I bet it was that Quadratus quote that I skipped in the first episode.
Or maybe it's for something that we talked about doing later this season. I don't know. But
all right.
But my point is just that, look, we're talking about the resurrection. You know, we are focusing in on this, but if you want to look at like other outside of just these 12 people who decided to double down on this, there's many, many, many more.
Yep.
Many more. It wasn't just them, right?
It
would have had to involve this. If you're proposing, if people are saying this could be a conspiracy or a hoax or whatever, it involved far more than just these 11.
Yeah. I found what you were referencing, and I know why we skipped over it. It wasn't our notes. So when I was giving you early, the episode 1, we were talking about the early Christian writers, non-inspired, but like the early church fathers, ante-Nicene fathers. One of the guys I skipped over was a man named Quadratus, right? He was an early Christian apologist that wrote a letter to the Emperor Hadrian, AD 117 to 138. He was defending Christianity, so he wrote a letter to Hadrian, who was a Roman emperor. This is what he said. He said, "The works of our Savior were always present, for they were genuine. Those that were healed and those that were raised from the dead, who were not only seen when they were healed and when they were raised, but were also always present, and not merely while the Savior was on earth, but also after his death. They were alive for quite a while, some of them that lived even to that day." So some people think it's talking about like Lazarus, right? Or the little girl that Jesus raised.
They speak plurally here.
Or the young man. Yeah, because that'd be at least 3 that he resurrected. Or some people might think this is Matthew 27, 52.
I think it's 27.
Yeah, either way, what it means is the people that were resurrected, no matter what that quote even means, what Matthew 27, 50 through 53 says, that on Sunday, when Jesus resurrected, other people resurrected too.
Yeah.
And these were things that like, you go into the city center and you're like, Bill, what are you doing? He's like, hey man, I resurrected from the dead. It's like, what do you mean you did? Hey man, Jesus, I'm assuming they knew what happened. You know, Jesus resurrected me from the dead too, and I'm here to
That's what
make
I'm
you
saying. There's no way God
evidence.
raises these people, calls them saints, and then they go up in the city and reject Jesus.
Yeah.
No, there are hundreds of people, even before the day of Pentecost, technically, who believe in Jesus.
Well, I mean, Acts 1 says there's 120 in an upper room.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
And plus whoever these are and whatever. That's my point.
Sure.
There's so many more than just the 11, right?
Well, I mean, 1 Corinthians 15 says he appeared to over 500 brethren at once. So this is the resurrection. So
any theory that, anyway, to say, what I'm trying to say is, of course, any theory that is based upon the idea that you have a small group of people working together to try to trick everyone, is just throw it away.
Yeah, if you have 1 or 2 people, you could think maybe that guy's off his rocker and maybe he likes the persecution. But when you have hundreds of people who see the resurrected Christ and live and die for it, it's like, okay, their post theft, if they stole the body, their conduct wouldn't look like Paul in I won't read this for time, but go read 2 Corinthians 11, 23 through 28, and then read that whole section afterwards where he talks about I'll read it. Listen to what Paul went through, right? Now, think about Paul. Did Paul have a miraculous experience with Jesus? Okay.
Yes.
Paul was persecuting and killing Christians, and something happened that changed him. And for 2 Corinthians 11, 23, are they ministers of Christ? He's speaking about these false teachers. He said, I speak as a fool. He's basically saying, look, if you're going to make me brag about myself for a second, I feel like a fool, but I will. In labors more abundant, he's talking about himself compared to false teachers who'd been basically deceiving the people.
It's a rhetorical question.
In stripes above measure, in prisons more frequently. He spent all kinds of time in prison.
Yeah.
In deaths often, almost died many times. From the Jews, 5 times I received 40 stripes. He got whipped by the Jews 5 times. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was stoned. 3 times I was shipwrecked. A night and a day I was in the deep. And journeys often, I mean, if someone went through this stuff like today, like one of these things, there'd be like a Netflix documentary about their suffering.
Yeah, and he's arguing the same thing we're arguing. He's saying, I went through all of this.
Yes.
And if this was all in vain, what do you think I'm doing here?
In journeys often, in perils of water, in perils of robbers, in perils of my own countrymen, in perils of the Gentiles, in the city, perils in the wilderness, perils in the sea, perils amongst false brethren, in sleeplessness often, in hunger and thirst, fasting, he didn't have food, cold, nakedness, besides other things, what comes upon me, my deep concern for the churches. And later in the New Testament, he says, this light affliction. These things he went through on earth, he says, a light affliction.
Light affliction.
Why? Because he believed in a resurrected Christ.
Because he knows what's waiting for him.
That's right. And he's willing to go through all of this stuff for heaven because he knows there is something after this, right?
Absolutely.
So Paul's willing to endure all that for a lie? Did Jesus not appear to him and change his life? If the resurrection is false, then obviously Paul would say in 1 Corinthians 15 or 23 or something like that afterwards. So is Paul and every other one of those disciples, except for John, are they all willing to die for a lie that they stole the body? In fact, I found this video that I think it's hilarious, and so that's why we're going to show it. But it's a video called "How Atheists Think Christianity Started," and so we'll roll the video now. But basically, this is I'll just play it, and then we'll talk about it afterwards.
Are we all here? I need 100% participation for this to work.
Yeah, everyone's here. All 12. 11. 11 of us. What's the plan?
Well, as you know, Jesus is dead. But stick with me, okay? Stick with me. I have a plan. We are going to steal his body.
Okay, I'm tracking with you. What's next?
And then we're going to tell the whole world that he rose from the dead.
Oh, you know I'm in.
I love it already.
All right, classic. Then what?
And then we're all going to get brutally murdered.
Wait. Come again. Could you go over that last part real quick?
Oh, what? We get murdered. What's the problem?
I like it. I like it. I mean, don't get me wrong, Pete. I love me a good hoax as much as the next guy, right? What's in it for us? Do we all get riches, fame, and fortune first, right?
No, get this. You're going to be hated, persecuted, and reviled for the rest of your life.
All right, so in that video, How Atheists Think Christianity Started, is basically mocking the idea that some people think that the disciples would steal the body for a hoax and then basically perpetuate this lie, where in the video they're basically like they're explaining the idea and then and then we all get brutally murdered and everyone's like, yeah, and the one guy's like, whoa, wait a minute, do we get rich first?
Riches, fame, fortune.
Then we get brutally murdered? No, you're going to be hated and persecuted for your whole life. I mean, the idea is that's what this stolen body myth perpetuates. The idea that, well, Jesus didn't resurrect from the dead. The body disappeared because it was stolen, and the disciples knew about it, and yet they lived their whole life and died for it, being persecuted, like we just read about Paul. Why? For what? What reward? Nothing. They didn't get rich. It's not like they got rich and famous and, they died for it.
Yeah.
And so...
And you think their families did better because of it?
No, of course. I'm sure Paul talked about how he drug families off. I'm sure that some people died because their families.
And some of these men had families. They knew what was going to happen to them.
Yeah. In fact, I've gotten my Bible written down. And this is obviously from church history, right? It's not in scripture. Well, one of them is, but this is what I have written about the deaths of the apostles, right? Matthew 24:9, Jesus predicted this. They will deliver you up to be afflicted and shall kill you, and you shall be hated of all nations for my name's sake. Okay. Specifically, the New Testament, in Matthew 20:22 through 23, I think that's actually specifically to James and John, okay? But listen to this. James died in Acts chapter 12 and verse 2. Herod Agrippa I killed James with the sword. That's the only one we have actually in the scripture, I believe. The rest of the deaths are tradition, okay? Paul was tortured and beheaded in Rome. I believe he was beheaded under a pine tree outside the Ostian Way, is what I think I read somewhere. Bartholomew was flayed alive and then beheaded in Armenia. Thaddeus was beaten to death in Persia. Matthew was killed by a sword wound in Ethiopia. Peter was crucified upside down on an X-shaped cross because he said he wasn't worthy to be crucified like his Lord, okay? Andrew was crucified in Patras of Achaia, which I think is in Greece maybe. Thomas was stabbed with a spear in India. I have a friend from India that says he could take me to the site historically where it happened. Matthias was stoned in Jerusalem, then beheaded. Philip was crucified. Simon the Zealot was crucified. James, the son of Alphaeus, was stoned in Jerusalem. And the Apostle John was the only one to die a natural death. Some people say John was tortured too, but it didn't kill him. I don't know.
Yeah,
really.
lucky
He was still
got sent to a work camp until he died.
Lucky John, who was exiled to the Isle of
died
Patmos.
in a labor camp. Oh, yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Like he's in some Mediterranean resort. They all went through that, and that's just the apostles. Other ones that are biblical writers apparently, historically, supposedly were martyred too. So they all went through that for a lie. They stole the body. And the ultimate question is, well, where's the body then? Just produce it. You're telling me you had the whole power of this city and they couldn't find out where nobody snitched on hiding the body? And let's say someone stole the body. Let's say it was this gardener, right, which didn't. He had to sneak by two guards who were armed. That's another thing. If Jesus was not the swoon theory, he rolled away. He's about half dead. He rolls away his own stone and sneaks by 2 guards. I mean, it's ridiculous. And the fact of the matter is, why were all these people willing to die? Because God did something that turned them from betraying Jesus into being willing to go to the ends of the earth, sharing the gospel, and die for it. And it's because Romans 1:4 says it. Romans 1:4, and declared to be the Son of God with power according to the Spirit of holiness by the resurrection from the dead. The resurrection from the dead is what sent the gospel through the world on fire and converted thousands of people.
Without it,
that's right.
throw it
And
away.
we got to remember that we got to preach it today too.
We need it.
If that's what they preached in the first century, that's what we have to preach today
It's critical.
in the 21st.
What's
Is
the
that right?
gospel?
21st century. The death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus.
What are you going to preach?
The death, burial, and the resurrection of Jesus. And the witnesses saw it, 1 Corinthians 15. Yeah. All right. Thanks for tuning in with us on episode 2 of season 4. In the next one, we're actually, now that we've sort of talked about the fact that you can believe the resurrection, in the next episode, we're actually going to talk about the events, what actually happened on that Sunday morning when Jesus resurrected from the dead. We're going to try to put all the different gospel accounts together and sort of go through chronology, hopefully turn it from maybe like a black and white on the page to hopefully maybe help you visualize what actually happened. So thanks for hanging out with us on the Authentic Christian Podcast. We'll see you back on the next episode. Hey, everybody. Thanks for listening to the Authentic Christian Podcast. This podcast is sponsored by the Gospel Broadcasting Network, or GBN for short. You can hop on the App Store, search Gospel Broadcasting Network, and you can download the app. And there's this show, many other great shows that you can watch or listen to and start learning more about the Bible and why we're here, what our purpose is. Thanks for listening.